Yes, no one is perfect, but late President Muhammad Buhari will be remembered in the nation history for several of his legacies. One very, very outstanding legacy that people will constantly remember was his simplicity in and outside office. Simple man in terms of how he carried on and including his dress sense and personality was very, very simple. And that simplicity can only be comparable to the simplicity exhibited by former President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. Again, you must also acknowledge the fact that the late president was very disciplined, both as a military leader and a civilian president. He was very, very highly disciplined in the conduct of national affairs, personal and national affairs. He was a very, very disciplined man. Again, you also remember him for his anti-corruption crusade, to the extent that even the African Union recognized him as the foremost anti-corruption crusader in Africa. Well, certainly a few elements of his lieutenants may arguably not qualify in that category, but as a person, you cannot trace any act of corrupt practice to the former president. As a person, he preached anti-corruption, and to that extent, I would say that in his personal and official conduct, he was highly not anti-corrupt. Now, again, you also have to credit him with one of the very few leaders in Africa who voluntarily surrendered power. And that is very significant. His tenure was not marked by any attempt to elongate his tenure. And after his 8 years tenure, he voluntarily handed over and then retired to his private home in Daura and subsequently relocated to Kaduna. That is very, very significant. I think the only person that shares that podium with him is past President Jonathan and the former President Olusegun Obasanjo. Again, you also have to remember Buhari as somebody who was very lucky. He ruled Nigeria both as a military president and also ruled Nigeria as a democratically elected president. Only very few enjoy that kind of accolade. Perhaps former President Obasanjo is the only one. Again, a lot of people will remember former President Buhari in terms of his public role in public office. No. Again, before that, he was one of the few people who fought the officers who prosecuted the Nigerian Civil War. And he fought the war to keep Nigeria one. I think that is very, very significant. If you remember the Civil War and you want to count officers who stood for a united Nigeria, you want to also consider the contribution made by former President Buhari to keep Nigeria one. Again, President Muhammad Buhari is also a lesson in courage. You remember when the Chad tried to overrun Nigeria, and some aspects of Nigeria. It was the GOC commanding the Just Division of Nigeria Army at the time. He rose to the occasion and reclaimed back the lost territory from the Chad Republic. That was a lesson in bravery. Again, you also want to remember former President Buhari for his role in uniting Nigeria. I want to specifically point out to what he did in terms of his infinite faith in the democratic process. He vied for office several times unsuccessfully, and he didn't lose faith. He kept on trying until he became president at his fourth attempt. That can also be equated with the legendary exploits of Abraham Lincoln, that man should not give up your ambition. Once you identify that this is what you want to achieve, no matter the setbacks, you continue to invest faith. So overall, I would say President Muhammad Buhari was a huge lesson in Spartan discipline, a huge lesson in anti-corruption crusade, a huge lesson in simplicity, a huge lesson in patriotism. And I remember his famous quote: "We have no other country other than this country. We shall stay here and salvage it together." So I think, in spite of what some might consider some of his failings, for me, he was a great man. And how do you define a great man? It's not because of absence of controversy. There are some people who say there were some controversial areas of his life. Yes, that rather than derogate from his greatness, should strengthen his greatness. Because a great man of vision and dynamism, is also identified by a controversy. You understand me? So I think, and I need to salute President Ahmed Bola Tinubu for rising up to give a befitting burial to this statesman. What President Ahmed Bola Tinubu is doing is to set a very, very bold example that if you serve Nigeria, there's a reward. And you recall that President Ahmed Tinubu is trying to give him a state burial, notwithstanding the fact that the man is out of office. That is salutary, that is encouraging, and that ought to be applauded, because we have just lost a very brave and great Nigerian.